Hello and welcome to What Is It About the Weather, where weather is always the theme, but seldom the topic. This week, UFOs. But before we dive into that UFO and weather connection, let's talk a little bit about winter. Okay, those of you in the southern hemisphere, zone me out for a couple minutes. I know you're just trying to break out of your winter. Those in the tropics, well, yeah, you probably zone all of us out when we start talking about snow and things like that. Any case, here in the northern hemisphere, past couple of weeks, it's been winter forecast season. So private weather companies, even NOAA here in the U.S. did their announcement yesterday. Warmer, colder, wetter, drier, all those sort of things. Now, for the average person, these sort of things, when you start really looking at the probabilities and whatnot, don't necessarily say a lot. Yeah, it's kind of good to have that anecdotal feel of, oh, it's supposed to be warmer this year. But as we all know, it's kind of like with tropical weather. All it takes is one storm, and you go, wow, that was a harsh winter or a tough winter. And it could just be because that one storm broke through and had an impact in an area like the southeast U.S. But they are useful pieces of information for maybe the energy and agriculture sector, where they tend to try to think in these longer time frames in terms of their planning and what the market impact might be, etc. But probably the bigger controversial piece, and again, the Weather Channel this week, who a couple years ago started naming winter storms here in the U.S., put out their new list of names. And people, I do wonder if the average person goes, oh, this is controversial and that sort of thing. I don't think they do. I think the average person appreciates that having a name attached to something is probably useful. Now, there is a good piece written by Dennis Mercereau, who used to write for The Vane when it was around and still does some stuff for Capital Weather Gang, and has written a book called The Extreme Weather Survivor Manual. Good author. So I'll put a link in the show notes to this article. It kind of goes into the pros and cons. And I think overall, I get why they're doing it, and there is some precedent in other areas of the world where naming has been done. And I also get the cons, why people in our field, when we always get this kind of microscopic view of, did you do a good forecast, did you not, how are you communicating the information, might have a problem with the naming of the storms. I think my bigger thing is it's not consistent in terms of impact to people in non-heavily populated areas. It's weighted towards heavy population centers. And I get why they're doing that when you think about what the Weather Channel is trying to communicate. I just wish it was more generic so that it treated all people the same, because I think when it comes to weather information and the importance of conveying that weather information, that the guidelines could be the same. Because I do think that they could have the guidelines where they're not biased towards population centers, yet if they want to have their coverage biased in terms of what they cover on air and covering more populated areas, I get that. I mean, that's, they've got to pay their bills, but that shouldn't have anything to do with why they named the storm, I guess, in my opinion. So enough about winter storms. We'll see how many we get this year, and if they make it, I want them to get through the full alphabet. I had some exchange on Twitter with a person in charge of the list this year, and he said that happened in the past. I don't think I was here that winter. I think I was living out in the country. So I want to see what the next list is and get to that many winter storms. I wish I could have them that many come through Atlanta, although if we had a full alphabet of winter storms come through Atlanta, we might be talking about a different climate than exists today. So, all right, let's dive in to enough about winter talk, right? I know, mid-80s, upper 80s here in Atlanta this week. I can't even talk about fall and get fall to stay. I shouldn't even be thinking about winter. So let's move on to the main story. So UFOs, right? What in the world does that have to do with weather? Now, you guys who've listened to the first episode have heard me talk about what really brought me into weather to begin with, and of course it was winter weather. Oddly enough, didn't even think about that as I was planning the topic. And I have an equal kind of love for science fiction, and I think if I had to think about when I got hooked, it had to be with Star Wars. Now, I'm thinking back, what year did it come out? How old was I? And all those things, but it was, I was young. I wasn't quite as young, and I kind of missed when I was born was when the first Star Trek was coming out, so I kind of missed that. But when Star Wars came out, I still remember even going to stand in line in the theater that I went and stood in line at to see the first Star Wars, and I was forever hooked after that. I mean, it was just science fiction became part of who I was. And it probably led to some of my geeky, nerdy aspects of my personality. But my love of science fiction has grown over time. Now, I do prefer more of the alien-oriented science fiction, although, I love a good movie like The Matrix, where it's about humanity and all, are we real, are we not? So certainly I enjoy that aspect, but I do is there life out there kind of story, and imagining when you look up to the sky at night, somewhere out there there's a republic, and good versus evil, we're battling it out for all of our sakes, and somewhere in the end of all this, poor little Earth is being protected by some grand guardians out there. All that said, it was interesting. I was out for a walk last fall, I think it was, and it was a very foggy night. And I had one of those, like I said, even though I love the alien thing. Well, I guess this series does have the alien connection. It's the X-Files, for those of you who watched it. And I know it's had a reboot. It's the original, still the original. And I was walking down, and there was this building being built very close to me. And for those who follow me on Instagram or Twitter, you've seen me post some pictures on this, particularly on Instagram, as the cranes have finally come down and the building's done. But there it was. And I looked up, foggy skies, and all there were these three bright lights staring down at me in the sky. And I really, for a moment, I thought I was in a scene of the X-Files. Here the aliens were coming. They were coming to take me, and the lights beaming down. Now, I knew what it was. It was the crane on this building, but literally the fog was so heavy you could not see the building, and you could not see the crane. All you could see was the lights coming down through the tree. It was a pretty kind of sci-fi moment, and I thought, weather, UFOs, is there really a connection? Now, this was before I was doing the podcast, but I always thought it would be kind of interesting. What was the stuff, is there really a connection? It'd be kind of neat to think about it. So with this interest in kind of sci-fi, space alien sort of thing, and having this scene, I thought, well, that's got to be a topic, as I was thinking about, topic ideas and whatnot. And as I've started doing more photography this year with weather, I'm seeing new things, right? I had another event in the last couple of years. We had a fireworks show, and there's one very near where I'm living, and we have this great vantage point. Well, last year, not this most recent year, there was these lights in the sky that didn't seem at all associated with weather or anything like that. They certainly weren't the fireworks. So I was like, well, I've got real UFOs I'm looking at now. Over time, I figured out they were coordinated, and it looked to just be drones filming. And clearly with drones, we're going to have an uptick in UFOs. I have no doubt about that, and I'm sure we're already seeing that with these things flying around in the sky. And there are other things too, like just a couple nights ago, I was out trying to get a picture of the International Space Station, and there was another light in the sky, and it was kind of, I don't know, it was just a white light at first, and it seemed to be kind of hovering in space, and I knew it wasn't, like a beacon light or anything on top of a building, because I knew where those buildings were. I was looking at it for a little bit, and it seemed to kind of waver or wobble a little bit. I'm like, wow, that's kind of unusual, whatever that is. Now, in time, it turned out that it was an airplane, and it was just, that was the light. I could see at a distance, and as it got closer, you could see, the greens and reds of, different wings and whatnot. But it was a reminder of, things in the sky, and I get it. I get why there are UFO sightings, and, as much as I'd like to think that there are aliens out there and they're coming and visiting us, it's you still wonder how much of this is driven by weather behavior. What is the weather link? So, let's talk about, okay, so here in the U.S. we have this infamous, Roswell, New Mexico UFO sighting back in the day. And it will forever be linked to weather, not because of the weather that took place when the event happened, but because what has been or was seen has been linked and supposedly is a weather balloon. Or that's what the story's been written. Now, again, I'm not going to get into government conspiracies or anything like that, or if there's a cover-up, or if aliens are watching us today. But so that's where that weather connection started. However, since that time, the link to weather and UFOs has continued. And the links that grew have actually had to do with some interesting things. So, for instance, I've read all these stories and doing the research about cloud formations called UFO clouds. And part of it is the clouds can have that kind of classic disc with a dome on top UFO shape. Okay. And most often these form as lenticular clouds. Now, for those of you who have watched the new cloud series that I kicked off, I did a intro. The first one was on gravity wave clouds that form sort of like lenticular clouds. The difference is the wave is occurring in a stationary place. So you'll see them over mountains, but they can also happen in other places where waves keep coming and they keep bumping up these cloud layers, for a lack of a better way to think about it. But particularly when they happen over mountains, they can take this kind of dome shape, and so they've been called UFO clouds. But then people start taking that and then they use it in a different way and say, see, this is a representation of a science experiment. And then the funny thing is, or it's aliens coming down from the sky. The funnier thing is this is caused actually by air motion happening, pushing up, not coming down from the sky. So I can debunk those right away. But there are other things as well, whether it's weather modification, which is a real thing, and I'm going to do a topic on that someday. And, there's talk about weather modification and some things in driving visualization of UFOs as well. But generally speaking, and like I said, even watching, as I've started to watch sunsets in a different way, or looking at the night sky and how the different stars show up that are planets, not stars, things like that, you start to realize, and like I said, even with that event the other night, that weather can actually cause something to look not like you would expect to. I was out the other night. It was generally a clear night. You look up to the sky and you see the stars, and the moon was rising on the horizon, and it had kind of a halo around it, and you're reminded that just because you look up and it seems clear doesn't mean on the horizon there's not clouds. And sometimes a thin veil of clouds, which isn't visible to your eye necessarily, can cause light and visual changes. So there's this kind of, again, weather UFO link, and I have no doubt that weather and weather phenomena drive the visualizations of things that our eyes can't easily explain. However, usually I think if you spend the time, you'll realize maybe what it is, maybe not. But so there is this weather UFO connection, and it is a lot more than just there was a weather balloon and someone saw a weather balloon sort of thing. Now, like I said, as always, I dig in the research, and there, as you can imagine, there's not a lot of research on this stuff, but there is a surprisingly large amount. And the other thing to keep in mind when you're looking at all these things is UFO doesn't necessarily mean aliens. And like I said, I talk that, and a lot of people do, when they think UFO, they're thinking about aliens going from the side. But UFO, there's a lot of things that could be considered a UFO because it really is truly just an unidentified flying object. It's just something in the sky that you see. It doesn't have to mean aliens. And a lot of the research tries to point that out and gets into the broader topic of unexplained things people saw in the sky. And like I said, there's been a fair amount of analysis on the topic. I was surprised how much there was. But when looking at specifics, and that's what I was wondering, that foggy night I was out there and saw those things, I started wondering, is there an actual type of weather, right? And that's where all this started, was there a UFO type of weather? And what I did find is most often the reported, and like I said, there was investigation of reportings and different aspects of it. And weather was one of the things. Time of day, as you can imagine. There were a variety of things. But most often it's when visually people see a clear sky. Like I said, that doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't thin layers of cloud or that the weather conditions are different in the high sky than they are on the horizon. That's part one. But part two, there was a book written about this stuff, in detail, and the only phenomenon that he could not find reported with UFO sightings was rain. And I found that particularly interesting, and I don't know if it's because people aren't out in the rain. You could argue that either no one's out walking around seeing things, or they're under an umbrella so they're not looking up the sky. I mean, I can think of a lot of reasons that would be the case. In any case, what it boils down to is no one's seeing. He could not find evidence of a single report of a UFO in a rainy sky. Now, does that mean that if we talk about UFOs from an alien context, that they're only coming out when it's clear skies, or what's the thinking behind why no rain? And like I said, I put a couple ideas out there, but it was kind of an interesting sort of thing. But end of the day, the research it wasn't all that conclusive. I would say the vast majority of the sightings were in supposed clear skies. Now, you could also argue that people are saying they want to say it's a clear sky because they want people to believe them when they see a UFO. But if we, let's just put all this in the modern day. Let's assume that we're all living in 2016, and modern day side. What are people usually when people see UFOs? What are some of the things they're seeing? And a lot of times it is you heard me mention these cloud things. Now that to me is not so much a UFO as people wanting to label something it's not. I mean, you can look at the sky, and a lot of times a cloud is a cloud. Now there are things when you get into the formation of what's in a cloud. Is it ice versus just liquid moisture, and how the sun might interact with that, or the moon might interact with that can create luminescence that is not what you would expect. And it can even create, you've heard me, and even again, if you followed me on the social media, you've seen pictures where the sun's rays, or we get this anti-effect on the opposite horizon, where you can get the same sort of feeling of rays pushing up. And that can happen, right? And it seems illogical because the sun's not on that side and the moon's not up yet, or in the sky, or further in the sky. But it can cause these same sort of things. And it's important to keep that in mind. But I don't know, you can't explain it all away to clouds and things like that as much as I think people would like to. Certainly, like I said, drones, weather balloons, they're all these sort of things. I think, like I said, I think drones are going to be the bigger thing. And even, we've talked about the science of it, and you followed me do an episode on things that mess with weather radar, and there have been these other cases with a Mexico radar of a kind of a helix, or a cyclone-looking signature coming up that they've not been able to fully explain. Or when I read this story in the Houston Chronicle, that they've not been able to fully explain what has caused it. And of course, people are going, well, it's an alien, it's a spaceship that's causing it. Well, radar do pick up a lot of, things flying around in the sky. I think more likely, given that it's a pattern, that we'll find an explanation to it. But again, at this point, it's still unexplained. And I think the thing, with all of us, some of us want to believe, like I said, that there are aliens and those sort of things out there. And some of us are more convinced of that than others. There was a case in Chile a couple years ago where an object was seen in the sky, and the government has investigated it, and even the government has said it does not appear to be a man-made object. That's all they said. And now the analysis that's been done has shown that there was a thermal signature on this object that does have a little bit of a cloud look to it. Although, again, the government did say it does not look to be a cloud. That's all they confirmed, that it does not look to be a cloud, and it's not a man-made object, or doesn't appear to be any sort of man-made object. But in investigating again, I found cases, and I've seen them before too, where jets have caused unusual clouds, and rocket launches have caused unusual clouds. Not saying that's what's going on in this case, but it's a reminder that you can get these isolated visualizations that are not consistent with the broader weather at the time, and they can be caused by man-made objects. But it's a reminder they don't have a good answer, and they're looking for people to explain it. Now, no one necessarily said it was some aliens coming out of the sky, and it could be that the Chilean government can't explain it well, maybe they do know what it is. I mean, there's always that potential, and we always have this conspiracy theory going on with UFOs. And again, I get why that is. But all of this end of day, when you look up to the sky, I think it's important to keep in mind that things that you see or think you see can often be influenced. They can either be weather events themselves or can be influenced by the weather that's going on around you, whether it's clear skies, not clear skies, differences in weather in longer distances and shorter distances. So we have, and I think we'll always continue to have, this rich connection between UFOs and weather. Now, all this talk aside, let's get down to reality for a moment. And as I said, I was watching that plane the other night, and at a distance looked like a UFO, but in time, it proved out just to be a plane. And I think that my recommendation for anybody when you see something in the sky, always give it time. If you're uncertain about it, try to see if you get an answer. And, a lot of times I think you'll find, in due course, you'll find it. What's intriguing and what always catches people with UFO is it's something that's different to them or something they haven't experienced before. Because if you're used to seeing a certain thing in the sky and you catch a glimpse, out of your eye about something, you'll go, oh, well, that's just so-and-so, or your brain writes it off a certain way. So don't be afraid to let your mind kind of find the answer so that it can write it down. But, I realize that that's not always feasible. But the other thing I think is important to keep in mind is if aliens are really coming here, right, if they're really coming to our planet, they've got technology that dwarfs what we have. Let's be real. We're talking about just finally starting to think about putting people on another planet in our solar system. Think about how advanced our technology's become. Night vision goggles, seeing things in the infrared, all these different things that we can already do. Well, trust me, if aliens are coming here, they can do these same things. So there's no benefit, particularly for them, to make themselves obviously visible. And their technology is such probably that it also moves in ways that we can't imagine. So, some of the sightings have tried to relay that sort of thing. And then you also get in this logic about, if aliens are here, do they want to make themselves known? And, are they peaceful? Are they here to overtake us? Well, again, despite all the Hollywood images, if they're here to overtake us, they're probably just going to do it. They're not going to just put a spaceship in the sky and go, oh, let's see if the humans see us. At least, again, that's my take on it. I think if you think about it logically, that's the case. But again, it all gets back to that quite often, when there's something in the sky that doesn't make sense, there's going to be a weather connection to it. Not always, but start to think about, when you see these things, how could weather be involved, right? Because there's a good chance it is. At the end of the day, the UFO weather connection will continue, right? And that's what's kind of cool. So look to the sky, find UFOs, see things you haven't seen before, and then look for the weather connection, because there's a good chance there is one. Now, like I said, weather UFOs always be connected. Your interesting tidbit of the week, actually, though, had to do with NASA coming out in 2015 and issuing an increased UFO sighting warning in Mexico. And oddly enough, it did have to do with a weather balloon. They've been doing, and not just NASA, but different agencies in different parts of the globe have been doing these higher atmosphere weather balloon measuring devices that tend to stay in the sky longer. So, we have these weather balloons that are launched every day, right? They give us information about what the vertical profile is of the atmosphere. But these new balloons are designed to stay up longer and get readings for a longer period of time. And like I said, if you catch it the right time of day, this thing can look way up in the sky, and with the right reflection of the sun is going to look like some sort of metallic object. If you've seen a picture of these things, it's going to look like some sort of metallic object in the sky that's just sort of hovering there. And then if the sun changes its position, it can make it look like it's vanished almost instantaneously. Sometime go, if you don't believe me, sometime go to a place where you could see jets in the sky, right? And I have that benefit where I am in Atlanta. I've taken some pictures lately, lots of contrails and that sort of thing. But if you ever go look at them at sunset sometime, you will see that you can be looking at a plane and literally only see the contrail. And then out of nowhere, in one moment, you will see a flash because of the way the sun angle versus that plane is set up. And then almost as quickly, it's gone. So, again, lots of weather connection. Not saying that that's always the case, and I'm not going to sit here and say that there's no such thing as a true UFO and even alien-based UFOs, because like I said, I want to believe there's such a thing. I just don't have, I guess, enough proof yet to make me know that that's exactly what's going on out there. So enough about UFOs. Now, I was going to do, I think, a full series. You know, you've heard me say I'm going to do a non-aqueous range. So we're talking about, actually, in some cases, those might look like UFOs coming out of the sky. We're going to do that. And I had a couple of other, we could have done a whole UFO series sort of thing, or unexplained object sort of series thing. But I think we'll probably break that up. And I am going to get to the non-aqueous weather next couple of weeks, next few weeks. I do think that I may hit on a couple of things before that one runs around. I actually, as I was even getting prepped for the show this week, I had a couple of new ideas that might be timely. We'll see. We'll see. Keep you in suspense. And of course, if you've had a weather and UFO experience that you want to share, let me know. Of course, you're going to say, how do I do that, right? Well, those who've listened for a while know the ways. Those of you that are new, first of all, welcome. I've had new listeners in, I think, Denmark this week was the latest country that has come on board. But you can get me via email, whatisabouttheweather@gmail.com. And, of course, you can go to the website and use the contact form there. Both of them, you know, they get to me the same way. Heck, you can contact me via social media, whether it's Twitter, whether it's, you know, Instagram, although that's a little harder to touch base, on Facebook, however you want to get hold of me. Feel free to contact me any way that's convenient to you. If you got something that you want to share, that would be great. Of course, you can also go to the website and get all this information, right? Whatisabouttheweather.com. How to contact us is there. The whole RSVP thing you've heard me talk about with supporting us is there. You know, rate, share, validate, and pledge. And, you know, catch past episodes. You will see, actually, if you go for this episode, you'll see a picture of that light feature I was talking about with the crane in the sky and how UFO-y it seemed to me at the time. But until next time, may you have safe, enjoyable, and of course, interesting weather, and interesting weather connections for that matter. Because as we know, there's much more to weather than the weather itself.